Hello everyone, this is a call, and so what I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to talk about Dhanishta Nakshatra. I think I pronounced that correctly, maybe not. The subject of this video is, in a lot of ways, it's about looking at how the planetary energies all sort of intertwine in order to sort of create the characteristics of this particular nakshatra. And specifically, we're also looking at the padas, or the four divisions within the nakshatras, which also sort of represent, in a lot of ways, kind of how the native who has this energy prominent in their chart. When I say prominent, usually what we're looking at is the ascendant, the sun, or the moon. However, if you have the energy prominent in the chart, the padas are going to illustrate in some ways the life path, as well as generally how I see it, the rate of transformation in the individual's life. In the case of Dhanishta Nakshatra, we have the Sun, Mercury, Venus, and Mars, which are all the faster moving planets. So the transformation potential of this particular nakshatra is, in essence, quicker, right? And you could even say to some degree that transformation for these particular individuals, I don't know, in some ways, when I was doing the research on this particular nakshatra, there were some expressions of negativity about Danishta, but most of it is very positive, which irritates me. It irritates me because, to me, it's the negative aspects of a nakshatra or a zodiac sign that oftentimes sort of dictate in some ways what its evolution in some ways, you know what I mean? So like, for instance, Saturn brings about a lot of pain, fear, and suffering, and that pain, fear, and suffering then creates transformation. Now, Danishta lies within the cusp of Capricorn and Aquarius. So we're looking at a lot of Saturn energy, but again, what I kept seeing over and over again was this these characterizations of it being wealthy and benefic and all these like very, very, very sort of like flowery kind of terms. And I kept thinking, like, well, maybe this was true, hundreds of years ago. I just wonder how in contemporary times the energies of this particular nakshatra translate. Most of the nakshatras that had a lot of sort of flowery language around them way back in the day, in contemporary times, is different. So let me get into it a little bit. I would say the prominent characteristic of this particular nakshatra is that of receptivity. And that is because it is symbolized by a drum, and a drum is hollow, right? So it's hollow, and anything hollow is basically inviting to be filled, right? So it's inviting to be filled. And, because essentially nature doesn't really have voids. I mean, voids, I guess, of course, probably exist. I can't perceive them, whatever. You could say maybe there's dark matter or something. I don't know. But the reality is generally creation is always filling voids. So Danishta, I would say that, in contemporary times, it's about what is this individual receptive to? What are they allowing to influence them? Because Danishta is extremely active energy. It is ruled individually by Mars. Now, why do I say Mars? Well, you can look at behind me. It says tamas, sattva. Tamasic energy is that of inertia. But, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And so they often say it's related to inertia. But what I talk about when I'm looking at the gunas, and that's what those are called, gunas. In gunas, there are three different energies that represent what the gunas are, which is rajasic, tamasic, and sattvic. Rajasic is activity. Tamasic is supposedly inertia. And sattvic is sort of like a balance point or neutral, or I like to look at it as a flow through. It's an openness or receptivity. And oftentimes what you see when you see sattvic energy, for instance, which Danishta is at its base. And that is true of the final third of the nakshatras. They all have sattvic energy at their base. And that basically means that their process in life is one of, well, deeply related to the spiritualization process. So the sort of highest intentions. And so Danishta, they say, is the pinnacle of Mars energy. Because tamasic energy on a secondary level and tamasic energy on a tertiary level, essentially what that creates is the Martian energy. It is very, very focused on the material plane. However, the drive of Mars is quite interesting. If you look at the symbol of Mars, it's a circle with an arrow that's pointing slightly upward, right? So the slightly upward implication of Mars is that it's the instinctual drive of Mars, or any nakshatra or a zodiac sign that has a lot of Mars energy, the instinctual drive that will cause problems initially. Because Mars is considered a malefic energy. Because it's considered this malefic energy, you kind of think about it when Martian energy is young. It's kind of warlike, it's aggressive, it goes slamming into things, it sort of lends itself to trial and error on some level. So, that being said, as it matures, and again, Danishta represents the sort of maturation or the pinnacle of Martian energy, what we see is the process of trial and error having occurred already. So the potential for this activity, this aggressiveness, this fieriness that is associated with Danishta, it is now taken to a pinnacle, meaning the individual can be discerning and to make choices as to how to apply that aggression. It's funny because when I was reading about this nakshatra, they kept saying it's bad for marriage, and I was like, why is this bad for marriage? And then I started to think like, oh, well, it kind of makes sense. I mean, Mars, Saturn, like these are generally not great energies for marriage. But they say that it's if the energies are on the Capricorn side of things, that it's worse. And again, I can't exactly explain that, so I'm just going to throw that out there. And any of you who are watching this video who have this prominent in your chart, you can tell me. Like, if you have your moon on Danishta, has marriage been tricky? Because there's a couple things. Is that one of the things is that these individuals, although social, are also very individualistic. They don't like to be told what to do, which kind of is a conflicting energy. So the other interesting thing about Danishta is that it's ruled by 8 gods, which I believe the term was Vasus, V-A-S-U-S. And this refers to the 8 Vasus, or 8 different gods. I don't know a lot about the gods. I'm not going to go into it. But what I will go into is the specific gods and how these specific gods lend certain attributes. Now, the other interesting thing is a lot of these gods actually are similar gods to essentially the rulership of other nakshatras. So what we're seeing of Danishta is actually kind of an amalgamation or a combination of, I use the term conglomerate, and I'm really flexing my vocabulary here. So it's essentially this collection of different nakshatras and the energies and how they all kind of intertwine. So Danishta is a bit of a, like I said, the word I like to use is amalgamation of various nakshatras. Mrigashira, Purvashada, I think Kritika, what else? There was Kritika Swati was another one. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and go through the eight gods of this particular nakshatra, and then hopefully it'll also spell out the attributes of this energy. So the first god that I want to kind of talk about is Appa, which is the sort of APA, that is the water god, and that is the same god that rules Purvashada. And so a lot of the energies of Purvashada also apply to Danishta, and that would be musical. We're talking about confidence, this sort of idea of invincibility and warrior-like. So all these energies, they do express themselves in this particular nakshatra. This thing around musical, right? So, and also to keep in mind that Purva was the pinnacle of Venus energy. So we're talking about a lot of sort of creativity and sort of, I don't know, sort of musical, again, it's the word that keeps coming up. And so being that Danishta is symbolized by a drum, where it also sort of, it implies musical abilities, and it implies this idea of rhythm and timing. So rhythm and timing sometimes could be applied to Mars as well, but when I tend to think of creativity, I tend to think of Venus, and this is very material plane creativity. So it's a lot of application of energy to the material plane, and that is Dhanishta, whether it's the application of one's aggression, one's ambition, one's socialization, one's timing, etc., etc. It really is about applying this energy to the material plane. So another god here is Druv, Dhruv, which basically means fixed, and that is I believe symbolized by it is the god of the pole star, and I believe the pole star is the North Star, not sure, but anyway, the pole star, this fixity that goes along with that's part of this nakshatra. To me, this applies more to this sort of Capricorn side of the nakshatra, but it could be, Aquarian side as well. And the fixity to me just screams in a lot of ways Saturn. But some of the characteristics that are applied to this are reliability, perseverance, and organizational abilities. And again, these are very Saturnian characteristics. And on the negative side, we're talking about stubborn, right? So, and I forgot to mention the sort of Purva Ashada negative qualities that translate into Danishta would be like vanity, right? So these individuals could be kind of vain, obstinate. Obstinate comes up again and again and again with Danishta, which in a lot of ways goes back to, I think, this idea that they're not great at marriage. So another god here is Dhar, Dar, and it is symbolized. Well, the symbol of that particular god is this pouring of water, which again sounds like Aquarius to me. And so what we're looking at here is wisdom, charity. I can't read my chicken scratch handwriting. It's pretty bad. But either way, conversive is what I wrote. Okay, so conversive, wisdom, and charity. So that is the giving, right? So this idea of pouring of water. So again, Danishta, the potential to be generous, the potential to be able to teach or to give wisdom in some way, charitable, etc., etc. Now, on the negative side, they could be talkative, overly talkative, annoyingly talkative, and the energy. Well, again, anytime you have a lot of energy and it's pouring out from an individual, there is the possibility that all this energy as it's pouring out becomes too dispersed. So in other words, the energy goes in too many different directions, and it basically resembles chaos. So you could potentially see that with this particular nakshatra. So let me take my sweatshirt off, I'm getting warm. Now, so that is that particular god. Now there is the god of air, Vayu. This is another one of the 8 gods that rules Danishta, and that is also coincidentally the god that rules Swati. So we're looking at material plane accomplishment and achievement. There's also a little bit of a rigidity that sometimes comes with Swati energy, but the rigidity is, I shouldn't say it's too rigid. There's a bending that happens, right? So it's often symbolized by grass. Kind of like tall grass that bends, so it sways and it bends with the wind. So there's a bit of an idea that there's a conformity that comes from that particular energy. However, some of the characteristics I've written down here are businesslike, resourceful, the ability to get things done. Let's see. But the other issue here is that these individuals may become overly concerned about their prospects for the future. So overly fixated on a goal or achievement. So kind of a lot of Rahu energy tends to express itself in this particular nakshatra, although I didn't see any sort of indications that Rahu was specifically associated with it, but every time I look at this energy and I kind of was reading about it, and I'm like, yeah, definitely some Rahu playing out here. Now, another energy that's playing out in this nakshatra is the god Agni, Agni, which is the god of fire, which is also the god that rules Kritika. Now, Kritika is a very destructive energy. I like Kritika, though. I don't mean destructive in a bad way. It's more about getting to the point. It's cutting out the unnecessary, right? So there's this association with Kritika with like knives and scalpels and surgical precision and military precision, and to essentially, but it's destructive, right? And so one of the interesting things about Danishta is there's a lot of Vishnu and Shiva are energies that tend to be associated with this energy. So we're talking about the sort of organizational aspect of God, of God, and the destructive aspect of God. So this is somewhere on the cusp of the ability to organize and to destroy. And all that kind of makes sense. But a lot of the energies here they don't express themselves particularly in a creative way. Although, once again, I keep thinking about the sort of musical thing. So I don't know. Again, when I was reading about this nakshatra, I'm like, it had all these very flowery language describing how wonderful it is, and and again, like how creative it is. But then the associated gods have nothing to do with creativity. I don't know. So again, so some of the energies that are associated with the fire god here in Kritika is, well, obviously a lot of energy, mentally sharp. I would say penetrating. Okay, so mentally sharp or penetrating. Let's see, discriminating. So discrimination is another one of those, like, you kind of cutting out what is unnecessary. Then on the negative side, we're talking about bad temper and potentially hurtful, right? So the implication here is that I feel like the energy of Dhanishta is impulsive at times, instinctual and impulsive, but also very direct and cutting potentially. So some hurt feelings could possibly rise. And again, maybe that's a contribution to the bad marriage prospects here, between the aggressive nature, the obstinance, the ability to sort of get to the point and to kind of like, I guess, again, to be very direct and say hurtful things. That is a possibility here. So now another god associated here is, I'm going to butcher this name, Pratyush, Pratyush. So Pratyush is the god of dawn. All right, so that's great energy, right? So dawn is the sun rising, right? So this is like the sort of energy of birth, which again, I think is interesting that creativity is not often associated with this nakshatra, because when we're talking about dawn, we're talking about the sun rising, and but it's the words around destructive and organizing that tend to get associated here. But I don't know, but I tend to think that with one of these 8 gods being that of dawn, we're talking about radiance, hopeful, all the sort of prospects of, like you wake up in the morning and it's a blessing to be born into a new day. Like, so the enthusiasm, birds are singing and plants are, sucking up the sunlight, and, there's a lot of great possibilities here with that kind of energy. So let's see, in music and dance are once again somehow associated with dawn, so think about like a celebration, birth into a new day. Let's see, so 2 more gods to go over here. And so we have the solar deity, which is, once again, it's another god associated with the morning time, but solar deity, I'm going to butcher the name once again, which is Prabhas. Prabhas? We'll go with that. So, and that brings the energy of lightheartedness, purity, good-naturedness, and wholesome. So wholesome. All right, then final god is Som, S-O-M. Every time I see S-O-M, I think Soma. And that is associated with Mrigashira in the moon. So we're talking about the energies of Mrigashira, and Mrigashira was a very gentle and sensitive nakshatra. And again, so we're talking about gentle and sensitive, and this contradicts in some ways all the sort of Martian energy, but this gentle, sensitive energy can also be fickle, deceptive, and it also can kind of lead to, again, as I was reading, it said extreme indulgence. So hedonism. Those are all the gods here. So when we're talking about this idea that Dhanishta, the overall energy here is that of receptivity. So it is about what are these individuals tuning to. It's incredibly important. So because they are ambitious, because they're here to achieve on the material plane, because they're here to, again, really to succeed, and to whatever it is that they become focused on, become fixated on, get that kind of Rahu-like tunnel vision with, they're here to achieve that and to be very goal-oriented. However, this idea of rhythm and timing, where are they getting their rhythm and timing from? If they're tapping into the flow of culture of our society, well, that can be a little bit rough, right? And I'm sure every society around the world has different kinds of energies that people can tap into, but again, it's like it doesn't necessarily lend itself to having a balanced existence, right? So if you're focused all on the external, not on the internal, what ends up happening is you become imbalanced. Mental issues may rise, etc., etc. A lot of pain, fear, and suffering, right? So now, if these individuals can tap into a more divine rhythm and a more divine timing, we're talking about the universe, God, whatever you want to call it, then essentially they go into flow. And this energy of Dhanishta, so the fourth pada, so going into the padas, we're going to look at the fourth one first because that's what's on my mind, is ruled by Mars. So extra bad for marriage here, right? So anyway, it's ruled by Mars, that fourth pada. So we're talking about extra aggressiveness, extra athletic. So one of the things I found interesting is that back in the day, when I was fixating a lot on sort of athletics and sports and kind of looking at astrology charts, I noticed a lot of Dhanishta natives are athletes, particularly basketball players. LeBron James, I believe, and Michael Jordan both. Anyway, you can look that up. I'm pretty sure that might be the case. So anyway, the idea that this is a very, very, very athletic and aggressive energy it's sort of, like I said, it makes a lot of sense. And so that to me is really fascinating because professional athletes, they had to have a goal and they had to practice. They had to be very disciplined, right? So we'll call Danishta a basketball player. So incredibly persistent. So persistence, discipline, Saturn, right? Saturn energy here. But again, this is about being persistent and disciplined, utilizing the aggressiveness of, we could say that karmically speaking, because when we're looking at Capricorn and Aquarius, we're also tapping into karma, right? So in a lot of ways, those are kind of karmic signs in a lot of ways. You could say Capricorn is the sort of material plane karma. It represents like 10th house, which is sort of your external world karma in some ways. And you could say in Aquarius in some ways is the sort of the benefits of the karma, sort of what you reap. And it could be friends, whatever it is. So the Mars energy, like I said, when we were looking at Danishta, we were looking at this kind of athlete energy. It requires everything that an athlete would put into becoming a pro. And that is hours and hours of practice. And again, persistence, aggressiveness, good use of body, and awareness in space. Or again, all these energies are prominent in this nakshatra. So let's go ahead and I'm going to go back to the first nakshatra, or the first pada, excuse me, which is ruled by the sun. So pada 1 is ruled by the sun, and I wrote underneath there ambition and success. Well, we're talking about Leo energy here, right? So Leo, these individuals want to shine, they want to be seen, they want to be famous, right? So you're going to get a little extra of that oomph in that particular side of things. And again, this is in the sort of Capricorn side. So we're talking about very worldly energy here. So it's very worldly. And but again, ambition and success. So second, and again, a lot of energy, right? So that plays out there too. So second pada is where we get the discerning energy of Dhanishta, the ability, and also communication ability and adaptation. And I thought this was, again, there's a lot of contradictory energies with this nakshatra, because I kept seeing obstinance, but then I kept seeing adaptable. And I'm like, all right, well, those kind of contradict each other a little bit. But if you were born in the second pada, you are a little more adaptable than if you were born in any of the other padas. So perhaps in the second pada, you're going to be more adaptable, a little more intelligent, you're going to be a little more flexible, and a little bit able, I guess, a little better at sort of diplomacy, let's say, discerning, etc. So third pada is ruled by Venus. Now Venus is going to create much more friendly kind of character, right? So it's going to soften a lot of the sort of Martian aggressiveness here. And I would say, like, if you're born in the third pada, that you're going to have maybe a little more success with marriage here. So, I wrote down amicable and social. So this is group energy, right? So this is the energy, Venus, as it relates to Libra. So we're talking about group energy, and on a deep level, we're not just talking about group energy, because Uranus kind of expresses itself in, well, obviously now it's expressing itself into the third pada because it's now in Aquarius, I believe. And also, I would say that at the soul of Libra energy is also Venus, right? Well, not Venus, but excuse me, but Uranus energy. And because the idea is, if somebody is group oriented, they're eventually going to see the flaws of the group and want to elevate that group to a new kind of understanding, a new way of organizing, and a new way of interrelating. So we're looking at more kind of a revolutionary character here. So when and it says social and sort of group oriented, I would say this is a much more higher minded aspect here, and less about the sort of hedonistic associations that I often have with sort of like Libra, Venus kind of energy. Here it's really about elevating energy into more inclusivity, kind of more of a liberal nature, and I don't mean that in a political sense. Just open, accepting, and liberal in that regard. So, and I already covered the fourth pada, which is ruled by Mars, which I wrote down aggressive and athletic, and that's my sort of basketball player talk. So, with all that said, this was kind of a long video. There was a lot to talk about here, because again, this is a culmination point kind of nakshatra, so I felt like a lot needed to be said. So with all that, appreciate you watching the video. Thank you.